Before I do some introductions, I'd like to do a couple housekeeping rules. One, if you haven't put your screen on gallery view, if you would do that now so you can see all of our wonderful faces. And two, I just wanted to remind you that if you have any questions, because I have lots of questions for these wonderful panelists, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat box and I'll try to get to all of them as many of them as I can. And also one thing I was reminded to tell you, if you would like to buy a copy of any of our books on this panel or anybody you've heard over the last weekend or this weekend, Bold Strokes, our wonderful publisher, is having a sale. It's called a flash sale. And all of our books, all of our ebooks are available at 20% off. So that's all the rules. So let me just do a few introductions. I am very fortunate to be your moderator, and my name is Jacqueline Fein-Zachary, and I'm, though late to writing and publishing, I'm very proud to present my debut novel. It's called Harvest Dreams, and again, my name is Jacqueline Fein-Zachary, but known to my family and friends as Jackie. So let me now introduce the panelists, and this is in no order. The first person I'm going to introduce is Lauren Melissa Ellzey. And Lauren Melissa Ellzey uses the pronouns she and her. Lauren Melissa, did you wave so we all know? Oh, there you go. Great. Is known across social media as Autinelle, and Lauren Melissa is a Black, multiracial, autistic self-advocate, artist, and activist and author. Through writing and presenting, she highlights the inequitable systems that oppress queer, BIPOC, and disabled folks. Her young adult novels, Boy at the Window and Gimmicks and Glamour, emphasize the importance of belonging for queer, neurodivergent youth of color. She holds an MS in Library and Information Services and resides in New York City with her partner and their 3-year-old dog. Jordan Meadows. Jordan Meadows has always been a big reader. When her daughter got into reading young adult, she read right alongside her, finding a new favorite genre. When her daughter started writing novels, and it inspired Jordan to try her hand, she also writes adult novels under the name Sage Donald. Jordan lives in Portland, Oregon, and when not obsessing or agonizing about her writing, well, none of us do that, enjoys reading, stand-up paddleboarding, hiking, playing board games, and hanging out with her dog. Greg Herren. Greg Herren is the award-winning author of over 40 novels, and I had to read that twice to make sure I was reading that right. That's impressive. 40 novels and 50 short stories. He is also the award-winning editor of over 20 anthologies. He has won an Anthony Award, 2 Lambda Literary Awards, and has been nominated for the Shirley Jackson, McCavity, Lefty, and Agatha Awards. He lives in New Orleans with his partner. And last, Suzanne, but not least, of course, is Suzanne Lenoir, and she is originally from you have to wave. There you go, okay. Is originally from the East Coast and is currently a resident of Cincinnati, Ohio. Her Valmoran fantasy series novels, A Talent Within and A Talent Ignited, I see them behind you, that's great, combined her love of young adult fantasy with her interest in medieval history. Suzanne is a technophile, video gamer, history buff, and avid reader who loves EDM. And I embarrassingly had to write to her and said, I'm sorry, I don't know what EDM. So she told me that is electronic dance music. And builds model siege engines. You're quite versatile. That's amazing. She lives with her adventurous, spreadsheet-loving wife and her blind, toothless chihuahua. So that was a great write-up. All right, so I'm just checking to see if there's any questions already. So I'm going to begin with the questions that I have. And I've told the panelists that I'm just going to follow in order, just go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then just go, do the second one. There's no particular order. So I'm starting, Lauren Melissa, with you. But here's the question for all of you. I have to tell you, this is my first foray into young adult fiction. So I just can't tell you how excited I am. And the fact that you all have written young adult novels just very impresses me. So this first question is much for me as it is for perhaps others to share. Could you all tell me, what is the definition of young adult? And how does it differ from other genres? So Lauren, Melissa, if we could start with you.
Certainly. So the definition of young adult, I think, varies from person to person, but as it stands, I think right now, since now we have like, children's fiction, middle-aged fiction, like middle-aged fiction,
Yeah.
middle fiction and young adult. I think young adult usually spans like 8th through 12th grade, if it's an 8th to 9th grade transition story. And it's fiction that appeals to audiences of that age demographic with characters within that age demographic. However, I don't think it's actually limited to young adult readers. And many folks read young adult, myself included, who are no longer young adults. Because we all experienced that at some point and can relate to those stories. I think also what's interesting is that young adult, I think, used to go into college age, but now we have new adult in that year. So it's in that for that time period. So I feel like young adult is kind of getting condensed into 8th grade transition into high school and then maybe transition into college. But it's a really, really important time in life. And it talks about, like, young adult can talk about so many different topics in a very like complex and nuanced amount of detail, I believe, but in a very clear-cut, open way that's easy to digest. And I think that's what makes it so attractive.
That's very good. Great answer. Greg, can you add to that?
What she said.
That's very good. You want to stick with that? That's good, because that was a very good answer.
Yeah.
What about you, Suzanne?
Yeah, I think that I would add in, because I'm in YA fantasy, and I read one time that like 75% of YA fantasy readers are actually adults, women. So yeah, so my characters are teenagers, but I'm not necessarily writing to just teenagers, because I just find the coming of age period to be so interesting. So
And Jordan, I know you have a young adult in your household, but your answer?
Well, actually, she's not in my household anymore. She's in her 20s, so we do both still read YA though.
Yeah.
So I just agree with everything that was said. I think it's those standards, like the main character is more or less a high schooler. That's kind of the intended audience, but certainly not exclusively the intended audience. And that one of the things I think that sort of characterizes YA is that I think there's a lot of self-discovery. So yeah, that's basically what everyone said, but those are my answers as well. So
good answers all. Okay. Second question for all of you is, why did you choose to write young adult? And actually, let's see. So we're starting, Greg, with you this time.
All right.
Because I know you've written a lot, but why did you choose, in addition, to write young adult?
Well, I started writing when I was a teenager.
I
didn't publish until I was much older, obviously, but as a teenager, I started writing about teenagers. That's what I knew.
Right.
And I've always had an incredibly vivid imagination. So I would come up with lots and lots and lots of stories and characters and places where they would take place and all of this and that and the other. And I wrote a really incredibly long book incorporating everything into one book, which was insane. And then it occurred to me later, like when I was how old I am. When I was growing up, there was just juvenile fiction and adult fiction. There was no distinction, any of these distinctions that we have now. Right. So juvenile fiction could be anything from the Nancy Drew books to the Golden Key books that you got when you were a toddler, to books by S.E. Hinton or Judy Blume. It was all juvenile fiction. And a lot of it, to me, I didn't like a lot of it that I was exposed to when I was that age, because it's what I felt was like the ABC after school special version of books, where there was a lesson that you had to learn, and it was very much the characters were just, and the story just existed to teach you this invaluable, important lesson you needed to know for life. And so I didn't really read much juvenile fiction. And then when I started in the 1990s, I discovered that there was an entire, sorry, my cat. And so I discovered that there were like Christopher Pike and R.L. Stein and those types of books. And it's like, well, this is the kind of stuff that
Definitely
I like.
a secondary character.
Yeah. The stuff that I liked to read when I was a kid, only it was all for adults. And so I took some of the elements of that massive story that I wrote and turned it into different books, and then just put them away and didn't do anything with them. Then when I started publishing, I was writing a private eye series. And I was just talking with a friend one day, and she was starting a small press, and she was for young adults. And I said, oh, I have some books about teenagers that I wrote about 20 years ago that are terrible. You can have one of those if you want it. And so she wanted it. And then I had to tell Rad, oh, by the way, I gave this book to a friend of mine who's starting a small press. It's YA. I didn't think you would be interested in it anyway. And she goes, oh, we do YA. And I said, well, I have these other two. And then she wanted those. And then it just kind of went from there. And it's been a lot of fun. I enjoy it.
That's great. That's great. Suzanne, how about you? Why did you choose young adult?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that I enjoy young adult fiction. I have, for some reason, always been interested in it. And there's just a plethora of it that came out, especially in the last 10 to 15 years. It's just been fabulous, wonderful trilogies and just a lot of stuff, especially in the fantasy realm. And it's kind of nice because it offsets my other side of my brain, which reads like 700-page nonfiction history books.
Yeah.
So I it's like a two halves get to enjoy. So when I decided to try to write something, because this is my debut, A Talent Within was my debut. This is the second in the series. I just thought I should try to write something I know, which is I read YA fantasy. And I read a lot of medieval history.
Yeah.
So
perfect.
But it's also very personal in that I chose teenagers because it was the most traumatic time of my life. And so the coming of age period for me is just I'm always interested in other people's abilities during that time period. I was orphaned when I was 14, full orphan, both my parents within 6 months of each other. And so that 10-year period between 14 and 24 was just chaotic, emotionally chaotic, not physically chaotic. And so it just is a period that interests me. And I thought, well, if I keep going back there, I might as well write about it, and let my teenagers do things sometimes the right way and sometimes the wrong way.
Right. Very powerful answer. Great. Thank you. Jordan, why did you choose YA?
Well, so like you said in the
you said
my
it,
intro,
I said it right. Anything else?
I started reading YA, and like Greg said, also YA wasn't a thing when I was a teenager, and so it was when my daughter was a teenager that I was like, oh, there's this whole genre out here, and it's very interesting because, because I just think that people in their teen years are so dynamic, and they're going through so much, and they're doing so much self-discovery, and that can happen in any age, of course, but teenagers, it seems like they're all going through it, and so it's just it's a time of life that you can really delve into those topics, and also like Suzanne said, I read YA myself, so so that was why I started to write. And then also because I had some book ideas that it just really seemed like teenagers were the only way to go. For example, Proximity, which was my debut with Bold Strokes, it just wouldn't, and it came out last year, it just wouldn't have, the main character needed to be living in within the embrace of her extended family, and for them to have some power over her in order for the book to work, for the plot to even work out. So yeah.
Ooh, wow, very powerful. That's good. I love asking these questions because I get these wonderful answers. Laura, Melissa, how did you choose YA?
So I started out writing as a young adult. So I was writing young adult when I was first writing, like Greg. And I don't want to ever tell you what my first novel was about because it was a lot, but it got me to where I am today.
Right, that's good.
But actually, I stopped writing YA when I was an undergrad, and I was writing adult fiction mostly for myself. And it was around the time that I started to get really involved online and social media, talking about neurodivergent and autistic self-advocacy and activism, that I started to connect more with young people that were experiencing really strong feelings of isolation and loneliness, much that I had experienced when I was their age, being autistic and in school and feeling like people didn't really accept other people's differences. During that time, like, my biggest companions were books. But nowadays, I feel like a lot of young adults connect online through social media, through video. And I thought, there is still something very powerful about learning about yourself and seeing mirrors of your experience through the written word. And so around the time that I was actually a librarian in a high school setting, I restarted writing YA. And I started writing with the intentionality of creating stories that would be a mirror for neurodivergent, queer youth of color, because I don't really see very many YA fiction pieces towards that audience. And so with Boy at the Window, I talked a lot about the experience of coming out, being multiracial, coming out, and also having a specific mental health condition that might make a teen feel different from their peers. Finding those who actually see them and love them, and maybe a boyfriend too in that story, that will love the main character for who he is as he grows more into himself. And in Gimmicks and Glamour, I explore more of the experience of a biracial, bisexual young girl who is feeling very ostracized for being, very angry with the world because she sees the world differently, and growing into accepting who she is and how she sees the world differently. Maybe she sees fairies, but also recognizing a little bit of that piece that I think really impacts Gen Z, which is, I'm going to unapologetically be myself. And I really want to speak to that experience through fiction, not just through social media.
That's great. Great. Very good. All right. Excellent answers. So I have a third question for you all, and let me just check. Okay, just checking for the chat questions. Are there any specific rules for writing YA, things that you can't do specifically? And the second part of that question I was wondering is, does Bold Strokes add on or impose any specific or additional rules? Oh, so this one we are going to start. Actually, Lauren, Melissa, we're back to you, if you don't mind starting us off. Any specific rules for YA?
Rules for YA I think I make my own rules, but I wouldn't necessarily apply that to other authors. But I do try to keep up to date with, I guess, in some way, like the social rules of teens today, like what they consider to be, positivity, what they consider to be toxicity, and trying to speak towards those experiences. So I try to stay in touch with that and follow their rules, since I am writing, my stories, but to them. And I don't think that Bold Strokes Books puts any rules on me as a YA writer, other than I guess I'll say I did once try to write about a like maybe someone who's a little too old to be YA, and it was suggested, hey, maybe take down the age. So I did, but I don't know if that was a rule. I think that was just good advice.
Actually, if I may jump in here, I think what was in my mind when I thought of this question is what about sex? Not that I'm always thinking about sex, but can you be specific? Because we have some fabulous erotica in Bold Strokes, but I don't know in young adult. That's the rule that I had in mind. So you can speak to that if you like, or just any other rules. So
I'll be quick because I want to hear from the other panelists. But I do have a sex scene in Boy at the Window, but it's not very erotic. I mean, if I were a teen and I read that, I would be like, wow. But like as an adult, I don't think it really touches into like erotica, and I think I was intentional. And the rule that I follow for that is I won't teach them how to do anything through fiction. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a good boundary. Let me see, Greg.
I don't know that Bold Strokes has any rules. I know, like Lauren, most everything I get is a editorial suggestion, which I'm usually really grateful for. As far as sex is concerned, I write about it and I talk about it in the books, but there is not any on the page. I used to write erotica and edit erotica for adults, and so I don't feel comfortable trying to tone. I don't see how I would be able to tone that down enough to make it okay. And secondly, I always want to write about it realistically, and realistically, some teenagers having sex for the first time probably wouldn't be really exciting or arousing or enjoyable to anyone reading it. I don't know, but it's
Probably relatable though.
relatable, yes, but I don't know. I think that for me anyway, I'm getting away, even in my books that I write for adults, I'm getting away from more of that, getting away from that as much. I don't find writing sex scenes when you've written hundreds of them. It's kind of hard to come up with a new way to make that fresh and exciting anyway. So I kind of been there and done that. And it's not that I don't think that teenagers are old enough or mature enough to read about sex or read sex scenes. I know I read The Godfather when I was 10, and
wow,
27 of the paperback is seared in my mind. Maybe I was clearly too young for that at the time I read that, but I don't know. I wrote a book about rape culture, but it really did not feel like that was an appropriate place to have any kind of a sex scene in that book.
right.
And that was one that did get a trigger. That book got a trigger warning, and that was rightly so, because it was a very adult topic, and it was written from the point of view of a boy whose friends committed the crime, but he wasn't there. But it had also happened to his sister, his older sister. And so we kind of had to include stuff that would probably make people squirm a little bit, but at the same time, I didn't want to romanticize or sexualize that at all, because it was horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Right.
That took a turn.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jordan, get us out of that.
Okay, yeah. So I think that that teenagers having sex is absolutely a normal and healthy part of being a teenager, depending on each person's individual development and readiness for it. And so there is sex in my books. It's not in my YA books. It's not explicit. It's fade to black, but they're definitely having sex, and they talk about it before or after. There's some lead up to it, but I don't put it explicitly on the page, because For me personally, I think adults writing teenage sex is a little bit squidgy, but so like that's for them to do with each other, and we can kind of stay out of it. So and that's just my opinion. There are YA books that I've read where there is sex on the page, and that's fine too. But that's my rule about that.
Yeah. Good answer. And finish off this question, Suzanne, if you would. Any particular rules that you've had?
Kind of go
used
with
or
this.
thought about?
I did. Well, it's interesting. A little side note. In the Middle Ages, they didn't have the kind of sense of privacy that we have now. So actually, they had a much more pragmatic view of sex. Even the church did. You know, we think of them as being very, ooh, the church. But that really wasn't true. Even the church knew that people had sex, and it was a much more open. You're in a hovel or sometimes a small house that basically had a barn next to it. You know, if we're talking about Central Europe, where everybody was in the room together. You're not going, as a child, you're going to know people are having sex. It just wasn't, didn't have the same, the Victorianism that came in the 19th century really changed our view of sex. Even with knowing that, and my fantasy novel is supposed to be medieval and based, I didn't go there. They, you know, it's around the edges. It's sort of implied. There's a few arguments that include discussion of sex about one of the older brothers. There in my second book, there's a concubine. So, but I don't really discuss what that means. Again, I'm not having a definition, but I have a scene where there's sort of an implied she's just had some sort of sexual encounter. But none of those things are in any way described. They're just sort of hinted at. For me, being fantasy, my big thing was what's the level of violence that's appropriate? Because my characters are in a violent world, or at least they've chosen to do some violent things. And I have to, in order for my character to grow, I have to show that that violence comes with consequences.
That's good.
And so there is some, I tried to keep the description of the violence sort of limited, sort of trying to say, because I don't want to have to put trigger warnings. I want people to read and kind of say, oh yeah, that's, you know, this is not contemporary. So hopefully they can kind of say, well, it is fantasy. I get it. There's violence in fantasy. So just the genre hopefully takes care of that. But I was very careful not to make it to be gratuitous or very specific. So that, to me, that's where I draw my line in YA.
Good distinctions. Great. All right. This question is probably showing my age, but I have to ask this. How do you remember back to these days when you're a teenager and young and all of this period? How do you remember how it feels? Or I don't, well, I mean, that's part of being a writer, you're making up stuff, but I'm specifically asking, do you remember, do you base it on your feelings for back when you were that age? Let me see, I think I got my order mixed up, but we're on, so according to this, Lauren, Melissa, back to you. Oh, no, sorry about that. No, actually, I did mess it up, so I'm just going to go by this. Jordan, if you don't mind, if you would start with this one. How do you remember back there?
Sure. Well, I remember some. I mean, I think that teenagehood is one of those periods of time that does kind of get imprinted in your head. There's a lot going on for us. And so there's sometimes I draw from that, but I also draw a lot from watching my daughter go through her teenage years and my nieces and nephews, and also talking to various people about their teenage experience of whatever age they are. I try and keep up with, like Lauren was saying earlier, I try and keep up a little bit with like what is happening with kids that age. Like it's through social media is often a way that I do that, so that I don't sound like I'm just completely out of step with how teenagers speak and think these days. So, and also from reading other YA. So I feel like I pull my ideas and my thoughts about teenagehood from just a lot of different places. And that's what I use to inform my characters and their experiences.
Good answer. And now, Laura and Melissa, back to you. How do you, well, using Jordan's word, how do you pull your experiences from where? From your own memory, or making up, or?
I think it's maybe in 4 avenues, some of which I feel like Jordan mentioned as well. So definitely social media helps. Reading YA that is contemporary, is current, also helps me to keep touch on trends and things like that. I know teens in real life, so I talk to them.
Yes,
And
face to face.
yeah, and I look kind of young. I don't look like a teenager, but I look young, so a lot of teens open up to me and talk to me about things, and I think many of them kind of like see me as like a cool aunt. So I'm like, well, this is content, so I'm gonna listen. I'm kidding. But it is nice to stay in touch. But I also have very, very strong memories of my middle school and high school life. And I have a semi-photographic memory. So if I saw something, I will like be very, very easily visually remember it later. Sometimes that's great and sometimes it's not. But I can remember I went to 3 middle schools and 2 high schools. I can remember the hallways in and out. I can remember exactly how the locker looked, a lot of these things. And so that's very helpful in terms of building settings.
That's great. Yeah, that's very good. Greg, can you add to that?
Well, it's funny. I had a conversation with my sister recently, and we were talking about remembering things when we were kids. And she's like, it's really weird. My kids, they don't remember the great trips we took to Six Flags or the times that we went to the beach, but all 4 of them can tell you in excruciating, vivid detail the time we hit a deer with the car and it hit the windshield and went up and over the car. They remember that. And so she's like, I think we remember trauma.
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember high school.
Right. Wow. Very good.
Right.
It's not hard to go back there. It's still very fresh in my 40 some years later. It's still
That's very good. Very good. Good answer. Suzanne, how about you?
Well, I would, or my wife would probably answer that I never grew up. So that's probably, I'm probably a little bit on that Peter Pan side as far as the things that I enjoy. So I'm really fortunate that I've had a sort of wide age group of people that I've been involved with as far as fandoms. And because I love cosplay and I like a lot of the sci-fi and comic book conventions, and I love gaming. And I have to tell you, I game with a lot of people that are quite a bit younger than me, and they're surprised that I'm playing Call of Duty with them. So, I get to hear, like, I'm kind of lurking in the listening part where I get to hear a lot of language and stuff. I didn't have to use it though, because this is YA fantasy.
That's good.
If I am going to write a contemporary, and that one's going to be hard, I'm going to need to do some research, and I got to talk to those, my nieces and my nephews and be like, come on, guys. I know about gaming culture, but I know that. don't know. What does Riz mean? Dude, I don't have any idea, so that kind of thing. I know it's charisma. I'm just using that as an example. But, it's, I would need some help. I have a nephew who's probably going to just eat that up when I'm ready to,
that's great.
Ask him for some good advice on the lingo. But otherwise, it's pretty much just pop culture. Love it.
Excellent. Wow, this is great. It's very fun for me. I'm learning so much. So, all right. So this is our 5th question. And my question is, Well, I think some of you have actually answered this, but we'll just do one little quick run through. How do you come up with your characters and your stories? I think you sort of answered this, but if we could do one more little round, because people always ask me this, and I'm just curious about how you answer that. So, I don't know why I keep picking on you. Seems like at first, but Lauren, Melissa, I have you on as the first one to answer this one. So how do you come up with it? I think I'm following my order.
I'm good. I can answer it. I can
Oh,
do
good,
it.
good, good.
Okay, this is gonna get maybe like a little weird, but I play ever since I was little, I played a game called Imagination. That's what I called it. I play imagination. And I would lie down and just lie down and imagine a storyline in my head. And come up with characters that were usually based off what I was interested in at the time. So gaming or maybe like a TV show. And I would come up with kind of like fan fiction for it in my mind, playing imagination. And I was doing that. I started doing that when I was like 6 years old. And I still haven't stopped. I'm in my 30s and I still say I play imagination. And that's where a lot of my characters come from, is just like being inspired by other stories, other films, but then I have my own unique characters that come into it in like almost like alternate universe fan fiction, and I build from there. So I will say that in Gimmicks and Glamour, Ashley Harris who's the main character. She came to me one day in a hotel room. I was about to go to a wedding. I was over caffeinated. So I desperately tried to take a nap to no longer have the jitters. And I was lying there trying to sleep, but instead, Ashley Harris came to me and said, "You're going to write me." And I said, "Okay." And I jumped out of bed and started writing.
That's great. Wow. Oh, I don't know why you didn't like that answer, but that's a great answer. That's fabulous. So you said it was going to be weird or something, but it's a great answer. So Greg, how do you come up with them? Are they from your imagination, or you intentionally write a specific character?
Or generally, like Lauren, Melissa, when I'm bored and in public places, I just sit around and look at people and make up stories about them and who they are and what kind of a person they are. And that's kind of how I practice making characters. I always say when people ask me if I base my characters on real people that I know, I say kind of, because I use the person as the physical. And then I can't base a character on somebody. All I can base a character, the only way you can base a character on somebody is to base a character on someone's behavior, because you don't know what their motivations are. You don't know their entire life story. You don't know what their family is like, what their love life is like. You don't know any of that stuff. You can't predict how real people will actually behave. You can when you're creating characters. And I also find it really fun to base villains on people I don't like in real life.
It's good.
They die horrible deaths.
Oh dear. Whoa.
A lot of in high school.
You did not hear it here first.
Oh my God, I hear the sirens now.
Yeah. All right. Suzanne, you have to get us out of another one here.
Well, I got some violence in my book too, but I am a very visual person, so I see everything like a movie. And so the two main characters in my series came from a dream. So I had a dream. It was not set in the Middle Ages. It was actually kind of a Baroque period, 1600s, I don't know, but the one ran out of a building and she ran into the other one in a garden who was playing an instrument. And that was literally how I came up with this whole series.
Very good.
And in a lot of these scenes, I'm really bad at sitting down and just writing. they generally come to me, like, especially in the middle of the night
Hmm.
when I can't sleep. They will keep me up all night if I do not get up and write them, but they're like little movie scenes.
Hmm.
And as if I'm shooting it. And one of the things I had to learn was to write the scenes as if I was looking from the character's point of view, because everything I see is from the camera's point of view.
Oh,
And
interesting.
that was my biggest problem at first with writing, was that I was writing with distance because I saw it all as a movie. And some folks at the GCLS Writing Academy said, you got to put yourself inside the head of the character. You write like you're the director. And
Right.
so that was really interesting. But I see them all as little movies.
Yeah, that's good. That's very interesting. And Jordan, how do you come up with your characters in any way you want to answer that?
So usually I first have kind of a spark of an idea or just a particular scene in mind that maybe is just rattling around in my head. And so I'll sit down to write that. And then I'm a bit of a pantser. So it's sort of, let's see where it goes and where the characters develop from there. So they kind of develop to meet their surroundings. Again, in proximity, the main character there, I did have an idea for her because she has a power. So this one's a speculative novel, and she has a power, and I had to figure out. I wanted her to have a power that interacts with one of her cousins in a particular way that makes them inseparable. They have to stay together, and so then I developed the character around that kind of flash of an idea. And then actually, and not just friends, the first idea that I had was that I wanted to write about a teenager grieving a friend who died in a drunk driving incident, which was actually something that happened to me as a teenager. A friend of mine, my senior year, died in a drunk driving accident.
wow.
So, but Jen, the main character here, she's nothing like me. So she just was in a similar circumstance. And also another goal for this book was that I really wanted to write a teenager who was figuring out that she was asexual. So she's homoromantic but asexual, and it takes her a good part of the book to figure that out and to kind of find her place in the world. So yeah, so basically I start with this kind of spark of a scene or an idea, and then just start writing and see what happens.
That's good. That's very good. All right, let me just double check. Oh, this is well, I guess I'm curious about this. Just very quickly, young adult is very popular. Can you, if we go through all of you to answer this, why, if you had to choose one word, why would you say, why is it so popular? Because it is very, very popular. Greg? Why do you think a young adult? I have a couple answers in mind. I'm curious to see if you will agree with me.
Shouldn't Laura and Melissa go first?
No, I've done that enough. Nice try.
Okay. I think it's because they're not. I don't want to. They're more accessible. I'll just say it that way. I think that young adult fiction is more accessible than a lot of forms of adult fiction, in that there's your primary story and your primary characters, and that's what the focus is specifically. Whereas when you get into longer crime, even with longer crime novels like Louise Penny, or there's a lot going on that you have to keep track of. Whereas when you're reading a YA book, it's all you're always in the same, you're not jumping, okay, now on the other side of Three Pines, this is going on. And it's more linear. It's easier to follow, I think. And people don't want to, I mean, I hear this complaint a lot from literary writers, but about how fiction is becoming more and more simple, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's more that we're bombarded more. When I was a teenager, we had 3 channels on TV and no cell phones and no internet and no anything like that. So I would just sit and read a massive book, 700 or 800 pages, and that's what I would do for the entire weekend because there was nothing else to do. Now we have a lot more options where our brain is a lot more fatigued. It's easier to read something that's linear, more direct, and more accessible than it is to dive into something that it's going to take you 3 hours to figure out what they're trying to say on this 2 pages, or this sentence that's going on for 3 pages, Mr. Faulkner. Fire your editor, Mr. Faulkner. But that's what I think. And I don't mean to that, and I'm not trying to say that it's not complex, because I think young adult fiction covers complex conditions and situations and issues in a way that makes them more accessible to a wider range of people than, say, something by, I won't say any names, but I think, does it make sense? Does that make
Yes,
sense?
but you've caused enough trouble. You can't say any names. So. Suzanne.
I'm going to go with, build on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I listen to my wife. I always listen to my wife. She loves
Good.
to read a lot of YA too. And one of the things for her is that she's busy, to Greg's point, and she just doesn't like a lot of fluff. She wants, she wants her books to move. And I do think that a lot of YA moves and can feel a little bit more like a movie instead of a heavy book, even with the topics being heavy. So I'm not talking about all YA. I'm talking mostly in where my little subgenre of YA fantasy. There's a lot of movement, a lot of action, and it just keeps going. You just want to kind of page turn it, and so I think that, at least for mine, that I think is probably what the appeal is for some of it.
Good. Sounds good. Jordan, why do you think it's so popular?
So, I mean, I do think accessible is probably maybe part of it, but for me, I think it's because teenagers are really interesting. I mean, they're intrinsically dynamic people, and so writing about them and reading about them is an interesting thing to do. They have so much going on in their lives at that point. So,
Absolutely. Laura, Melissa.
First thing I'd like to say is that YA is so popular amongst young adults because it's written about them and for them in a validating way that isn't necessarily trying to be manipulative or to overteach something, right? So I think for YA for teens, that's I want to bring in the main audience there. But for adults, in addition to what folks have said, I think that YA, the reason why, I'll just speak for myself, I love YA that speaks towards heavy topics in clear, finely focused ways that I don't think adult fiction often does. Sometimes I think adult fiction can get lost in the heaviness and you just kind of like swoon with it. And YA is like, here's a heavy topic, here's why it's going on, here's how we can like find support, like here, and it feels good. And I think, and to think about the topic so focusedly, and then in that same vein, the topic itself that gets chosen is so vast because teens experience so many things, and what teens are experiencing, many adults are actually still experiencing. And it can be healing to see a young person work through that, even if we're still working through it in our adulthood.
Yeah, that's great. Great answer. Great way to end. I think all of you have been very good about. No, Greg, you started. Do you have something else you want to add?
I just wanted to add on top of what Melissa was saying, is that young adults love it because it's about them. Adults love it because they can relate.
Right.
These are teenagers, and when you're reading a book about a teenager, you can think to yourself, what would I do if I was that teenager? Whereas you might not necessarily do that about a scientist stuck on Mars.
Yeah, yeah, that's very good.
Now I'll shut up.
No, it's great. I think you've all done a good job about showing your books, but if you can just hold up your books one more time, because these are fabulous books and I want everybody to know about them. So Suzanne, you got this. And Greg, you want to hold one up?
I don't have any YAs handy. You caught me off guard.
All right. Tell me the name of a YA book.
Bury Me in Shadows.
Perfect. Okay, that's great. Thank you all very much. You've all answered questions very profoundly and very relatably, if that's such a word. Thank you very much for being part of the panel. And we're going on. We have more panels and readings tonight and all day tomorrow. And don't forget the sale that goes on till midnight tomorrow night. Thank you all very much.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.